renew, and reimagine retirement. Welcome to Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. We believe that retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what can be the most impactful season of a person's life. So don't retire. Become repurposed. Well, I'm your host, Jared Sebest. I'm the co-founder of Retire Repurposed alongside Ben Tejas. Thank you so much for joining us today. Whether you found us on the radio, whether you found us online, regardless, head over to iTunes, find our podcast, click subscribe, and better yet, leave us a quick positive rating and review. If you just take a moment and do that, we would appreciate that so much. Now, this podcast is all about retirement, but it's not about money. It's about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. Few people can just flip the switch from working a career 30, 40 plus years and then shutting it off and starting this new retirement life without methodical steps to living what we call a repurposed retirement. If you want more for your life and your retirement, then you have come to the right place. Well, on this episode, we bring you a special New Year's edition of Retire Repurposed for 2023. The last year has brought lots of ups and downs for retirees, so we wanted to take a look back at some of the high points. In this podcast, I surprised Ben with the 3 most popular episodes of 2022, and we talk about how retirement can be a new beginning for retirees in 2023. Enjoy this episode. All right, folks, welcome back and Happy New Year. This is going to be a special show that we have on tap for you today. We're going to do a little recap of the 3 most popular shows of 2022. So we've got kind of a fun, exciting show on tap for you today. Just a quick reminder before we get started, we've got a Facebook group called Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. Join a growing community of people that refuse to accept the typical American dream retirement. Look for more tips on living repurposed, Facebook Lives, Q&A sessions. Join today. Go to facebook.com, search Becoming Repurposed in Retirement for special content. Join a growing community of people that refuse to accept the typical American dream retirement. Of course, there's many ways you can connect with us. One of them is right here on iTunes with our podcast. Another one is our website, retirerepurposed.com. But the Facebook group is a place where you get kind of the in of everything repurposed. Ben Tejas joins me on the show here today. And Ben, we did kind of a Christmas edition. Last week, we talked about making new traditions, kind of trying to inspire retirees to maybe make Christmas look a little bit different because they've got the power to have that type of influence on their families, don't they?
They do, and too often we as the younger generations forget that. We get into our typical, American Christmas, and we oftentimes forget what Christmas really means, right? We forget we talked about that last time, what it really means to be a Christian and celebrate that holiday. And it's more than baby Jesus, right? It's about Jesus the Savior, and that was a fun show to do. And if you haven't listened to that one, go back and listen to it.
We say it every single show. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you do that. But go back and listen to some of these shows. By the way, we're right smack dab in the middle of a series on retirement habits. We're about 4 episodes deep into that. We did our Christmas show last week. We're doing a little special year-end or year starter episode today. Something we're going to talk about here later in the show. We got some special guests on tap for 2023. One of those is Michael Franzese. We got him on the show, and that's going to come up maybe in the next week or 2 as well. But he's a really interesting guy. Ben, you've known of him for a couple of years now, and his story is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I've been actually following him because anytime I see somebody that's approaching 70, and now he is
71,
right? Yeah, that's doing really cool stuff, I take notice because I'm like, that's someday what I want to be like when I'm in that age, and when I'm retired, quote unquote, but I'm to that point where everybody's saying I'm done, right? And I'm going to be doing something else. And I think there's a guy that has a great story and is in his 70s now and is doing a lot of cool stuff. I've heard him on a number of podcasts that I listen to where he's interviewed, and thought, man, if we can get him on this one, it'd be great.
He was just on the Jordan Peterson podcast a month or 2 ago. And if you're not familiar with Michael Franzese, his dad was the underboss of the Colombo family mob back back in the 50s and the 60s. He joined the mob when he was 18 years old. He was one of the most powerful mob bosses back in the 1980s and 90s. Spent 8 years in federal prison, 3 of which in solitary confinement. Became a Christian during that time. He's one of only 2 people on the list of the 50 most powerful mob bosses back in the 80s that are still alive. The other one is in prison and most likely will die in prison. The fact that this guy is alive, a Christian, not in the mob, is just it's quite a story. So we've got him on the podcast coming up, so we're excited to bring that to you in the weeks ahead as well. So what we wanted to do, and this is kind of a surprise show. Ben doesn't really know exactly what we're going to be talking about today, but I looked up the 3 most popular / downloaded episodes of 2022, and we wanted to kind of bring those to you and kind of rehash some of those concepts. And it was pretty interesting as I did a little bit of research, but Ben doesn't have any idea what these are. Do you have any inkling at all as to what the most popular episode was of 2022?
Well, you hinted at that. I'd be surprised at which ones. You probably don't see it coming. I think that's one of the cool things about creative work like this. It's like, you get into this. I think all work, and I think part of our work is creative work. And I love working on case design and stuff with our financial clients. But man, this is fun, creative work, putting out content that people can consume and enjoy. So I am excited to hear what they are. So yeah,
I would agree with that. Sometimes we do an episode like this is gonna kill it. Like this is gonna be the one that everybody listens to. It's the one that like nobody listens to, and then there's other ones that certainly aren't throwaway shows, but like are maybe what you could consider less popular topics, and those are the ones that go bananas. So you just don't know. So drum roll, here we go. The most downloaded episode of 2022. It was back in February, earlier this year. We called it True or False: The Math in Retirement Doesn't Work. And just to preface what that show is, give you a little review, Ben, as we're trying to think about what that show was about a year ago. You remember a year ago, we read the book by Tim Ferriss, The 4-Hour Workweek. And he actually said a number of things in there, and he talked about retirement. By the way, that book is not about retirement. It's not a Christian book. It was a very influential book. I recommend people read it. It's called The 4-Hour Workweek because he just talks about life, and he really challenges people to look at life in a different way. But one thing that he does talk about is he mentions how really retirement's kind of like a worst case scenario insurance policy. He goes on to say, it's one of those things where, if you're an influential person, retirement's not going to work for you, because if you do it, you're going to be so insanely discontent that it's just not going to work. But one thing he goes on to say is he says, if the math actually does work in retirement, it's not going to work for people who are high producers while they're working to just be able to sit back and not be producers when they retire. And so he brought up this math issue with retirement. And even if it does come down to the numbers, for people that were producers while working, it's not going to work for them in retirement. And again, I thought he had tremendous insight for a guy who I think he's about our age and not really in the retirement space.
No, but he deals with a lot of highly successful people. And I think and on his podcast, as he's continued to do his work, he's dealing with people who have done a lot. And I think one thing when I get around really, really successful people, Jared, that I'm always amazed, I'm like, they're not even talking about retirement. Maybe more of our work is around, charitable strategies and, wealth transfer strategy, all that kind of good stuff in our work. But it's not around when can I be done, right? When can I be done? Sometimes it looks so different because they're enjoying what they do so much. And back to the beginning of this show, when I was talking about creative work, I love what I do. Don't you? Mm-hmm. I mean, we do this job, and I would come here even if I don't have to be here, but I love it, and I love working with our clients. I love working on this show, and I think that's what I took away from that book was work is good. I think we too often have this idea of work is bad, right? I mean, the fall made work not as enjoyable. But work in itself, we were created before the fall, remember, to work. Adam was working. He had creative work. When he's naming the animals, he had what quote unquote harder work, which was more manual labor, like building and farming the land. I mean, these were things that were pre-fall. So work's a good thing. We're created to do it. So if you got somebody that's highly successful, and the math of retirement isn't going to work, I know why it's not going to work, because it's too many times we center around, will I have enough?
Right.
Will it work out? And the reality of it is, we're not created to do nothing. And I think that's a huge takeaway.
I do want to talk about the math, and I'm going to ask you some questions about that in just a second. But this is actually an excerpt out of Tim Ferriss's book. He says, if the math does work, it means that you are one ambitious, hardworking machine. And if that's the case, guess what? 1 week into retirement, you are going to be so bored, and this is his words, he says, you're going to want to stick bicycle spokes in your eyes. You'll probably opt to look for a new job or start another company. Kind of defeats the purpose of waiting, doesn't it? He says, I'm not saying don't plan for worst case, but don't make the mistake of making retirement the goal. And he just basically summarized everything we just said.
Yeah, I mean, he's talking about life deferral, right? That's something we talk about so many times with people, is don't just defer your life. Work, enjoy life, right? And if you're talking about this math, like save, so that someday I can start to live. That is so backwards to how we're created. That's so backwards to how we should live our lives. We should be doing what we can every single day for God's kingdom. We should be creating things for people to enjoy as part of our work in some way. And he's 100% right. The math doesn't work, because now you've saved all these funds to retire on,
right,
and you've made it. And now you're disappointed because you're not enjoying your life, which in retirement lets you down.
Yeah, well, one thing I've noticed or learned this year about this whole platform as we've developed it, the podcast, if you're living in life deferral mode while working, it's not this switch that you can just flip once retired. If you want to live with purpose and have impact while in retirement, you have to be doing it during working. And unfortunately, because of the negativity that work has, again, our mindset goes into life deferral. So it's this someday, one day mentality. And I've seen this, is that people have a hard time flipping that switch once they retire. Now all of a sudden they're supposed to live this repurposed retirement, which we talk about. But if they weren't living that way before, it's going to be really difficult to do it after.
Yeah, almost impossible, right? I mean, and that's part of what our coaching and our helping people comes down to. And hopefully our content is make the switch now, right? Start flipping that switch. Today should be a day, hey, maybe it's 2023. Maybe it's this upcoming year where you can say, you know what, I'm going to look at my work differently. And it doesn't mean, just a quick tangent here, it doesn't mean that your work has to be like, oh, this is my ultimate calling where I am today. I don't believe that. I think sometimes people get in the habit of saying, oh, this job is not perfect, therefore it's not a good job. No, many times parts of our work aren't fun. There's a fallen part of our world that makes our work not always fun. But and it doesn't have to be like your life's purpose. Could your life's purpose be raising your children, creating good citizens in this world, and your work? It allows you to use some degree of your skills and to do something good for others and create something that other people, be tied into something. Right. That's what you got to look at.
So the most popular episode was that one. Does the math work in retirement? The second most popular episode, 2022, came the very next week, and it plays perfectly into the conversation. I think this is why it resonated with people. The next episode that we did was called Boredom, Retirement's Worst Case Scenario. That was the second most popular episode of the year. We usually will say, again, we're in the retirement planning space. I think most people would think, if you were to ask them, what's the worst case scenario when it comes to retirement? What's the worst thing that can happen? What do you think that they would say?
No, I run out of money.
Running out of money.
Yep.
And certainly the fear of that is real for a lot of people and is certainly there and probably should be for some people. But what we said in that show is that the biggest worst case scenario is living a life of boredom, because that sucks the life out of you more than running out of money.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so many times we look at money as the end game, and we got to have, yes, it is a tool, right? So that you can do things. And there are people that should look at that side of retirement closer. You don't hear that we don't think that's important. It is. Right. But far more important than that is making sure that you're still living your life, right? Remember, whenever I talk with clients, I'm trying to get them to prioritize what's most important to them. And we look at, the time on this earth, and I look at their talents, what they can do, or their treasure, their financial means. And I ask them that question. We never get the question first of our financial means. Guess what? That's always the lowest ranked of those three things. And it's almost always their very most important thing is time, right? And what's important to them is their time and their talents and what they can do, right? So if you think that you're going to come into retirement and just do nothing, boredom, and if you feel that, man, that is that I would agree with 100% what we're talking about. That is what creates more problems in retirement than the financial side.
I think helplessness or hopelessness has got to be one of the worst emotions to feel as a human being. And not to turn dark here, but if you hear people or psychologists or people who study data, who study people who take their own lives, the primary emotion, I mean, there's plenty of emotions that go into it. I mean, it can be fear, it can be anger, but hopelessness is the one that like leads people to do drastic things when it comes to their own life. And I can imagine what an awful position to be in, where you're getting older. You now left the workplace. You inherently know this is kind of the last season. And you're looking ahead to the future, and there's nothing there except everything is going downhill. Now all of a sudden my work is away. And again, we know this. People they become more isolated naturally the older they get. They spend less time with family the older they get. And so I feel for retirees that get into that age bracket, and now all of a sudden they've left the things that gave them the reason to get up. It gave them the guardrails we've talked about thousands of times on this show. It gave them something on their calendar to constantly look forward to, and there's nothing there, and the sense of helplessness and hopelessness overtakes them. And again, they sit around and just kind of exist, and that is just not how we're called to live, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 60s, and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I love watching people, and you know who they are because they're in your life somehow, that are in their 70s or 80s.
Michael Francis.
Yeah, that are just not willing to be bored. They're like, I'm not going to do that, right? And this is, I'm a huge proponent of rest, and in retirement, I'm a huge proponent of earned rest and living in a way that allows this restful season of life to spend more time doing the things we enjoy. But you got to balance it, right? And you got to make sure that you're conscious of, man, I might get bored in this season, and making sure that I don't end up getting in that mode of isolation and pulling away and feeling as if I'm, I think it is a hopeless like sensation of I'm just, what else is there to look forward to?
Exactly.
And that's a tough spot to be.
Passion to me is kind of the opposite of boredom. If you're passionate, it's hard to be bored when you're passionate about something or life or something like that. And again, not working isn't the ticket to finding passion and excitement in life. It's maybe a piece of the puzzle of a retiree's life, but it's not the ticket to happiness, certainly. I was listening to some sort of leadership training yesterday, and they said basically if you were to ever stop working, you literally disengage, and the ultimate result is boredom. This leadership training had nothing to do with retirement. And I was like, man, that's 100% true. And again, we're not suggesting you have to be 75 and working a job, but I mean, adding value, being passionate, living life, using your God-given talents and abilities still, none of that comes to an end once you retire.
Yeah, and if you're stuck in that spot right now and you're towards the end, maybe it is the time to move out of that particular job and move into something else, right? I mean, I think we can always look at this second season of life as being an opportunity to do something great, right? Retire to something, not from something. That doesn't mean you go right to something. I mean, make sure you take a Sabbath rest in there where you can really digest your what you should do next. A plug for our Repurposed University work. If you haven't looked at that stuff, be sure to take a look at it. We'll get you a promo code so you can get through that. But yeah, it's great to see people that do come through this retirement mode, looking forward to what's next. Take a break, figure out what's next, but then step into the next thing so they don't become bored.
Understand who you are. That's a huge part of it. And that was kind of part of our last mini-series, really understanding thyself. And again, Repurposed University takes you through that. You can check that out at retirerepurposed.com. All right, we got about 5 minutes left. We'll cover now the third most popular episode of 2022, and it came not long after these two episodes we just talked about, but it was when retirement is not a beginning, nor is it an end. That was the title of that show. So just a little premise here. I think people go into retirement thinking that it's It's probably both. It's an ending for a lot of people, and it's a beginning for a lot of people. And it's neither. It's both in some ways, but it certainly isn't the end all is all. We talked about in that show how retirement lots of times is the beginning, but it can't be the beginning of now permanent rest, permanent vacation. We talked a lot about life deferral, which we've mentioned already on this show. We talked about how sometimes people that are white knuckle retirees, which we have kind of classified as those people who are just like counting down the days, man. Like, I got 6 months, 4 days, and 8 hours left of working until I can finally retire. Those people will look at retirement as now the beginning of life. And there is some truth in that, but that's also kind of that's a slippery slope. Because we feel sometimes too that those people can look at retirement as kind of it's that showroom effect. Like, this is the thing that's ultimately going to make me happy, and that mentality doesn't work.
Yeah, it's so much not a destination. Retirement's not a destination. I mean, a lot of people think of retire. I mean, maybe that's because that's what we tend to hear from, our culture today is like retire and then go travel and go do this and do that. It doesn't work that way. I've worked with thousands of retirees. You're the same person you were prior to retirement that you are in retirement.
Right.
It's just part of life. It's actually more about you. I think the best way I look at retirement is when you stop earning most of your pay, most of how you are going to live on a paycheck from a job, and more about you not relying on that paycheck.
That's the biggest difference.
Really, that should be it. It's like, I don't have that normal paycheck. Hopefully, you've done things to bring income from other sources at that point, but then you're still the same person.
Yeah. If you hated traveling while working, you're probably going to hate traveling.
It doesn't change, guys. It's the same.
Right.
You're the same person.
Yeah.
And some people, I think, get in this mode of like, I'm going to retire and be this different person, and they get there, and then they're really let down.
That's interesting.
Because they end up being retired and unfulfilled because they expected to feel different, look different, to act different, and it can really let you down at that point.
Some people look at retirement as an end where they think like, I either can't or shouldn't work anymore. They may think that I'm not as valuable as I was. And probably the biggest retirement lie out there that we are trying to bust with this particular platform is that they think that it's the end of them adding value. And that's not a right mentality either, right? So again, going back to the title of the show, it's not a beginning or an end. It's purely a continuation of who you are. But again, let's speak into that just for a little bit. This lie that goes around that's telling people is young. I mean, Ben, me and you are in our mid-40s. 60 in our mind isn't that far away. And I know 60-year-olds who are already, I can see it in how they talk and how they carry themselves. Like, well, this is just kind of, I've got a couple good years left, and that's it. And to me, that really saddens me.
It does. And I think, 60 is the new 40. People say things like that all the time. I've dealt with retirees for over 20 years. And that is very, very true. Retirees today are living much more active lives, are able to do so much more. Technology's brought, joint care to a whole new level where people can stay healthier, more active longer. And I think it should be looked at completely different. I love, and as we've been talking, I'm looking on my phone at one of my favorite people, John Piper. I mean, the guy's got this amazing ability to talk through what it means to, he's phenomenal. And one of the things he did is write a short book. It's more of it's more of just an article, but it is a published book, Rethinking Retirement, Finishing Life for the Glory of Christ. And he talks in there so much about the idea that, we need to rethink what retirement means. And I couldn't agree more. We need to look at it not as something that we can attain someday, that we can finally get to 60 and then think about not working. We need to look at our entire life as what can we do for the glory of God, whether or not you're in your 40s, 50s, or 60s.
Well, I sure hope you enjoyed this episode of Retire Repurposed. For more tips on living a repurposed retirement, go to our website, retirerepurposed.com. Until next time, I'm Jared Sebesta. Remember, don't retire, become repurposed. We'll see you then.
Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.